Marcos buys it. And what happens is I say, Marcos oh, wait a minute, I missed something there. Marcos, so I catch myself and have to go back, so.
You know, the more natural it's going to become and the more second nature it's going to become.
I need to watch more of your videos.
Bienvenidos al Spanish with Nate show. Yo soy Nate. I'm a Spanish teacher and I currently live in Mexico City, and I learned Spanish 9 years ago in high school. And today we're joined by...
Hola a todos, me llamo Mateo, soy de Estados Unidos y soy principiante. Llevo casi un año estudiando español, pues quiero aprender español porque la familia de mi esposa, que es de México, no habla inglés y quiero poder hablar con ellos.
Before we get into the show, make sure to hit that subscribe button and share with your family, friends, and your favorite dog. Cuéntame, ¿qué está pasando? What do you need help with?
So many things, but let's focus it down to the thing that really is causing a problem for me, which is subject pronouns. I believe that I know a lot of the grammatical rules because I've studied them for a little while now, but putting them to use is so difficult. So I would like a little bit of advice. I would like to go over the rules and make sure I understand them, and then maybe some advice on how do I get my brain to understand to speak backwards from what I'm used to doing, right? Putting that pronoun in front. And then sort of the same thing when talking about the past, because in English, right, we just say he went, she went, they went. But in Spanish, we have the preterite simple, the preterite imperfect. And so, I'm going to throw this in there too. The conditional. I'm trying to tell a story in Spanish. I'm like, is it the conditional? Is it the preterite? Is it this? And I'm like, there's this like crazy algorithm happening in my head, and it usually results in just a blank stare. And then I give up and I switch to English.
And it's super normal because a lot of times when people are learning Spanish, they get super overwhelmed by all the different tenses. But right now I'm going to show you, it's actually easier than you might think. So let's go over object pronouns first. So direct and indirect object pronouns is what you're struggling with. So this is from my Spanish Speaker Academy. So you'll be in that soon. So the idea between a direct object pronoun and an indirect object pronoun is a direct object pronoun is directly acted upon by a verb in a sentence. And then an indirect object pronoun is indirectly affected by a verb in a sentence. Now, that's a bunch of gobbledygook, and you're like, okay, Nate, what the heck does that mean? Let's take a look at this first example. Tengo, right here, is the verb. El pastel is the direct object. It comes directly after the verb. Therefore, it's being directly affected by it. So this is a direct object, but then lo is the object pronoun representing this object. So as you can see here in this little chart, we have me, te, lo, and la, nos, los, las. I'm pretty sure you're familiar with this kind of idea. And for everyone who's watching, this is the yo person. So me is for yo, te for tú, lo, la, él, ella, usted, nos for nosotros, and los and las for ellos, ellas, ustedes.
I do have a question. It's more of a kind of a clarifying thing because I'm not sure where I learned this from, and I'm kind of questioning whether or not it's accurate or not. But I have this idea: direct object pronouns, not always, but most often are referring to an object rather than a person. Whereas
that is correct.
Where the indirect object then mostly is talking about, just because of the type of what you're talking about is having something, or not a lot of times you are expressing a verb directly to somebody unless you're going to hit them, or there's just so many more verbs that you would do with an object versus directly to a person, I guess. So that's accurate to think that way.
That's exactly right. Yep, like 9 out of 10 times we'll use direct object pronouns to talk about objects or things instead of people. However, sometimes we will use them when talking about people if they're the only object in a sentence and they happen to be a person. So kind of how you were talking too about where do I put the object pronouns, it's a really great question. If we look at example number 3 here, Spanish typically follows the structure of subject, verb, object. So in this case, la comida is still just a normal object. It is a direct object, but it's not a pronoun. We have two kind of ways that we can place object pronouns, okay? And this applies for indirect object pronouns as well. It does get a little bit complicated when you start putting direct object pronouns and indirect object pronouns together. But when we have just a direct object here, we'll have Marcos la compra. So the object pronoun goes before the conjugated verb. That's really important. So it goes before the conjugated verb. However, if we have something like this, which is called the present progressive, we can attach it onto the end. For example, Marcos está comprando la. Also say Marcos la está comprando because está is a conjugated verb, and so we can put it before. In example 6, we have Marcos cómprala, which is a command.
Yes, question about that. Does that only apply to positive commands, like do something, versus a negative, hey, don't do that or don't buy that? Is it the same or?
Good question. You're totally right. In this case, if we have a negative command, we would actually put it before. Great point. The affirmative command would be cómprala, and it can't be Marcos la compra. That sounds like we're saying Marcos buys it as opposed to Marcos buy it. But really good point. If we say don't buy it, then it would be Marcos no la compres, which is the negative command. So la comes before the conjugated verb compres in that example. Yeah, really good question.
I think one of the problems that I have right now is I'm still having to translate a lot directly from English to Spanish in my head. So as I'm saying it in my head, I'm saying Marcos buys it. And what happens is I say, Marcos oh, wait a minute, I missed something there. Marcos so I catch myself and have to go back. So what is the fix for that? It's just time and practice?
I always tell students, it really is just a time thing. It's the more and more you're listening to the language, the more and more you're practicing speaking, the more natural it's going to become and the more second nature it's going to become.
I need to watch more of your videos.
You got to listen to more of the podcast.
If you guys have not watched those, I highly recommend them. I have listened to so many Spanish podcasts. Definitely in the top 3, and it's definitely the funniest for sure.
Thank you, man. All right, so let's keep it going then. If we take a look at example 7, same thing, right? We can attach a direct object pronoun onto the end of a non-conjugated verb if it's coming from this idea va a. So, Marcos va a comprar la. Now, once again, the conjugated verb in this example is va. So we can put it before the conjugated verb. So we'll have Marcos la va a comprar. So then just taking a look at some more examples, yo vendo la ropa. So once again, vendo is the verb, la ropa is being directly acted upon by this verb, therefore it'll be yo la vendo. Okay, it's a direct object pronoun. So that's kind of the idea, and I think these are just more examples for you to look at. If you want to become conversationally fluent in Spanish as fast as possible, check out the Fluent Spanish Speaker Academy. Here's what some of our current members have to say. Claudette, a USC med student, says, I've taken a few semesters of Spanish classes at my college, but using Nate's course helps me facilitate my knowledge to a whole other degree. I become more comfortable with the language and I've learned to love the journey. Your YouTube channel and new podcast recently broke me out of a 1.5-year hiatus from learning Spanish. A few months later, and I'm now feeling more confident in my Spanish than I've ever been, and your content helps immensely. I also managed to break out of my confidence slump, and I've been talking Spanish with coworkers, cashiers at the store, and in restaurants. We stand behind our program with a 30-day full refund policy. If you're not happy within 30 days, we'll give you your money back, no questions asked. To find out if the Academy is right for you, click the link on the screen or in the description below. All right, let's take a look at indirect object pronouns and kind of see the difference. Like we had just talked about with direct object pronouns, we had a very similar example, but now we've added in another object here, which is me. So this is a pronoun. So we have ella me compra el pastel. So compra is the verb and el pastel is being directly acted upon by compra. Okay, so this is the direct object. But we have this other little object pronoun, which is an indirect object pronoun, which in this case is me. For example, in number 3, we have ella me lo compra. So coming back up here from this.
When we're talking about the indirect object pronouns, what is when we say métele, are we saying for me, for you, for her? And is there anything else? Could it be by me, or is it pretty much just for you, for her? Like, cause I struggle with that sometimes. Like, is it para ti, para mí?
Just think of it as me. If you see te, just think of it as you. Le as he or her. Yeah, it's not necessarily for, because in this case, I could say, ella me lo compra a mí, or me lo I can't even think of the idea, or es para ti, it's for you. But that's not necessarily using an object pronoun, if that makes sense. So once again, we have the same idea here. Now we're just using what's called the present progressive. So ella me lo está comprando, or ella está comprándomelo. You can attach it. Just like if this me wasn't there, you could say ella está comprándolo. But here we have two object pronouns, so we'll say ella está comprándomelo. Once again, we have the object pronouns coming before the conjugated verb, which is va in this example. So me lo va a comprar or va a comprármelo. Okay, va a comprármelo. Emphasis is important. Look out for that. It wouldn't be va a comprármelo. It's va a comprármelo.
Do you just kind of pick one way and stick to it, or do you find yourself switching it up sometimes? And is there any particular reason why you do that? Or because for me it's like we do have some freedom in English, but for me anyways in English I usually just say things the same way.
Totally, it's just choice. So me saying me lo va a comprar or va a comprármelo is completely just a choice thing. It's just the way I like how it sounds, or it's just the way I say it in the heat of the moment. I would say most times when it comes to these things, I will attach object pronouns onto the end of things. So like I would rather say ella está comprándomelo instead of ella me lo está comprando. Both are perfectly fine, but just my own personal preference, I would prefer to say ella está comprándomelo or va a comprármelo. This idea of the redundancy, le conté la historia. So if you were to just say conté la historia a él, it'd be better to add on the object pronoun here, so le. Representing him. Now, a lot of students really struggle with indirect object pronouns like the le and the les, especially because there is no definite gender, right? Le can refer to him, it can also refer to her or to usted, which is why context is so important in the Spanish language. A él or a ellos in these examples just adds extra context for us. However, if we already knew we were talking about Bob, let's say, we're talking about Bob, Bob's a great guy, Oh, ¿sabes qué? Le conté la historia ayer. I told him the story yesterday. We understand we're talking about Bob because of previous context. But sometimes, just to add on extra context and clarify what you're talking about, you can add on a él or a ellos. So in this case, le conté la historia. I told him the story. Les preparamos la cena. We prepared them dinner. Voy a mostrarle ahora. So I'm going to show him now. It could also be her now. Or it could also be you, formally, usted. We don't know because we have no context. So if I said, voy a mostrarle.
Mostrar significa como show something, or I'm going to show it to him now or her now.
Exactly. Mostrar is to show. Les di el dinero. Okay, so I gave them the money. Or, ellos, ellas, or ustedes. Could be, I gave you guys the money. We don't know because there isn't enough context.
Can you help me understand that a little bit? So if I want to say something, for example, like two things. I asked you a question, and then the second thing is yesterday she asked about that.
This one kind of would mess me up for a while too. We're talking about asking a question. You can use the verb preguntar, meaning to ask a question. But a lot of times people say that that's incorrect or sounds wrong. So better to say hacer una pregunta. So for example, she asked a question would be ella hizo una pregunta, using the verb hacer in the preterite tense. Ella hizo una pregunta. She asked a question.
And sometimes I'm looking at a sentence and I'm like, is that a direct or an indirect? And it doesn't really necessarily matter, but what's the trick to understanding that?
Most times it would just be the ones like le, les, lo, la, and los, las, where you'd be like, okay, this is a direct object pronoun, this is an indirect object pronoun.
Here's the reason why I asked that, right? Because if I look at an example sentence and let's say it's using me, and I go, okay, I want to try this, but I want to say it's for him. And now in my mind, I'm like, well, I don't know now, because it could be le, it could be
low. It could be low. What I'll say, and what I always tell students, and this isn't necessarily right all of the time, but I would say 90% of the time, if you want to say, for example, in that case, him or her or something, and you're not sure whether to use le or lo or la, just use le. Because most times when we're talking about people and we use an object pronoun, we'll use le or les instead of lo, la, los, or las. Now, that's not always the case, but most times it is.
I mean, I know that, but it's like, were you just saying that right now? I'm like, oh yeah, that's basically, if you don't know, well, I already know, I told you earlier that I know indirect object pronouns most refer to people. So I don't know why that didn't occur to me to even think, but yeah. When I go back to my professional life or my personal life and I'm speaking English, my confidence level is so much higher now. Sometimes, get that little social anxiety before a meeting starts or whatever. Dude, I swear, now I'm like, I go into meetings and I'm like, bro, I'm speaking English. This is easy. Like, this is, come on. Like, it's not even I don't even think about it.